but I would have bet you my life savings that that was going to be just an absolute, as they call them in the South, a frog strangler of a storm there. Like I thought it was just gonna, the heavens were gonna open up. Have you never heard about a frog strangler?
I'm not familiar with this frog
Gully,
strangler
Gully
of which you
Whomper,
speak.
a frog strangler. That's
You
it's
need to
so,
bring some Southernisms more into our podcast, Zach.
it's rains so
This is
much it,
great.
it drowns a frog.
Welcome to the Greens and Blues 14er podcast. This episode, Zach goes Scooby-Doo on the traverse between Challenger and Kit Carson. I don't want to eat any more peas or yams. And Zach and I sit down and share stories from the ones that turned us away. Well, Zach, today we're going to talk about the 14ers that turned us back. Whether this is a fun episode for us to relive or not, we'll find out the hard way maybe. But before we get into that, how are you doing?
Well, I'm doing well, Eric. I was telling you before we started recording here, I'm in the middle of trying to get in shape in the winter. I don't know if it's get in shape or stay in shape, but it's one of those. I'm trying to lose a little bit of my Christmas tonnage here, and
Tonnage
um,
makes it sound like you just did nothing but eat cookies the whole time.
Visco Cheetos are really good, but yeah, I'm enjoying getting in shape. And every year around this time, my brain starts to think about mountains.
Mm.
And so that's where my head is starting to head. It's a little premature. I've still got many months before I can actually start hiking again. But yeah, that's where my head is at. How about yourself, Eric? How are you?
I'm good. I'm actually right at the very front end of a couple of weeks of a little bit of craziness, actually. So in a couple of days, I'm gonna accompany my younger son. So his school, they do what they call voyages. They do a couple of them every year. It's part of their curriculum. So they just basically take a 2 or 3 day field trip, so to speak, and kind of just go do a bunch of outdoor stuff. So I'm gonna
Cool.
help out with that, and then I've got a couple day break, and then I will go to near Estes Park. There's a retreat for folks that write music and do songwriting, so I'll do that for a few days, and then another 2 day turnaround, and then my family and I are going to go to Honduras on kind of a vision, somewhat short-term mission kind of a thing.
When
So
you say vision, that doesn't mean you're going to be doing psilocybins or anything,
no,
right?
we're not going
I
to
just
have
want to
that,
clarify that for
not that kind
people.
of vision. Yeah.
For listeners that don't know, the music that's the bumper music at the beginning and end of our episodes, that's Eric playing that. That is not
No.
some jingle that we ripped off the internet somewhere. That's Eric. So, are you writing music right now, Eric?
I,
Are you putting
I
stuff
I've
together?
I've been writing music for 30 plus years, and kind of I guess in the last 6 to 12 months have kind of a little bit of a resurgence in terms of how frequently and how fervently I write songs. So this retreat will be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm excited to see what you do here. I'm excited to cash in on the Eric Fredrickson World Tour.
Uh, yeah, I don't think that's gonna happen, but if you want to wait, you can be patient, and I don't know, probably never pan out, but
You need the secret sauce, Eric. I know you're good at the slow jams. You got to have a banger in there every once in a while. And
you got to get
learn,
my Green Day influenced punk song in there and
yeah,
see what that gets.
I picture you more of a Bryan Adams kind of guy, kind of that blend of like soulful rock and reminiscence, but then every once in a while you got to have a banger. So
Yeah, yep. I've been told by one or two people that I look like Bryan Adams, which I don't know if that's really true, but there's half a dozen different people I've been told that I look like.
only people in Colorado, well, maybe a few other people will get this, but I say this every time. Nobody can see Eric. He looks like Gabe Landeskog. That's
Yeah.
if you're listening and you need a point of reference, it's Gabe Landeskog with a pair of glasses. That's
Yeah.
who I'm talking to right now.
Yep.
Good
I can't tell.
hair, clean flow. He's got it all, folks.
I don't know if my beard is more red than his, but other than that, yeah, I can aspire to look like him. He's a good looking chap. But
Oh, he's a dime. He's pretty good looking. Well, Eric, what are we talking about today? And why the heck are we doing this?
oh, why are we doing this? That's a great question. But what we're doing is we're going to talk about some of the 14ers that
And
turned us
13ers.
around.
One of
Eh,
mine's a 13er, but
One of yours is a 13er. Yeah, I
yeah.
don't, me, so I've got three of them, and one of them will take just a few seconds, but they're all 14ers. Have I gotten turned around on a lot of 13ers? I don't think
You
there's
did on one,
many. There's one,
but
but
these are your stories to tell, not mine to tell. So
well, and you made it to the top of that one, along with 160 plus others at this recording, correct? How many
that is
13ers
true,
have we
but
got?
the more you hike, the more you get turned around.
That's
And
true.
I remember when we talked with Laura Clark, what, gosh, almost a year ago,
Mm,
she said, for every one she's done, there's probably one she didn't do.
hmm
And my ratio is not like that because I'm not getting out as much as she is or doing new routes as often as she is in
Yep.
shoulder season like she often does. But the more you hike, the more you're going to have these stories of the one that got away,
hmm
and both of mine are ones that I want to return to. So this is also a love letter to peaks to be climbed again or soon, hopefully. But why is it important to talk about the ones that turned us away, Eric?
It's a great question. I mean, beyond just kind of sharing our stories, I think it's helpful. I've learned this in just listening to lots of stories and lots of hikers over the years. It's important to learn from our mistakes.
Sometimes they're not even mistakes,
Yeah, sometimes it's beyond our control. It's weather, or for whatever reason, we get sick, or there's fatigue, or whatever, just stuff that's maybe out of our control. But yeah, really helpful to learn when
Mhm.
we don't make the summit. Okay, what caused that to happen? What can I change for next time? So yeah, I think that's probably the big thing that I take away from things like this is, okay, what do I do differently next time? So what do you think,
It,
Zach?
it's often said that you learn more from failure than from success. Some part of me feels like that's just people failing, salving themselves. Uh, my mom always, when I was in sports as a kid, I was always on losing teams, and she'd always say, "Son, losing builds character." And at some point, I got so tired of hearing that, I said, "Mom, I think I've got enough character now. I'd like to start winning." Um, but there is a sense in
Oh.
which, yeah, you learn way more from the quote unquote failures. And I don't think any of ours qualify as a failure in any
Hmm,
sense. As we've always said, any day in the mountains where you get home safe at night is a good day.
that's right.
But yeah, in mine in particular, there's a few things that I think I could have learned from them. And also sometimes it's just the humbling experience of knowing that it's not all in your hands.
Yep.
So I think those are the things to take away from what we're about to talk about. So, Eric, with that in mind, what's your first tale of woe, O Odysseus?
So there's actually three different 14ers that have turned me around. The first one was Mount Columbia, which I went into crazy detail in episode 18 in our worst 14er experiences. So I'm not going to rehash any of that here. That was the first time I got turned around. I would chalk that up to me and my hiking partner making a lot of mistakes along the way, and then weather eventually got us. So I learned from that one. I learned a lot from that one. And choosing a good hiking partner was probably the big thing I learned from
Yeah, no.
that experience.
uh,
So the second one, I had probably lived in Colorado for 3 or 4 years when my buddy Travis, who we've talked about before, he said, "Hey, Eric, I want to come out this summer. Let's try to hike Mount of the Holy Cross." And I said, "Sure, sounds great." So we decided to try and do this in early June. And I think many of our listeners probably already can probably predict somewhat what happened
we
when
need a
we tried to
Morgan
do that.
Freeman voiceover at this point. And that, my friends, is where it all went wrong.
In a world where a bad decision was made. So he came out. We were planning to camp at the trailhead the night before and then hike the next day and then break camp and go home. We were going to hike the standard route, which is via Half Moon Pass. To
Mhm.
get up to the trailhead for that route, you have to go up the Tigawan Road. And what we didn't realize was that in early June, there's a gate on that road, and that gate is closed for very good reason.
Because it's
So
snow after that, right?
there's so much snow there. So we get to the gate, it's closed, it's locked. We're not getting through that. And so we basically had to figure out, okay, are we going to try to make any lemonade out of these lemons, or are we just
No,
going to go home and give up?
you turn around and you go have a beer in Summit County and you get up the next morning and go on a walk.
So the smart people would have done that and probably did. We didn't decide to do that. We said we're going to at least try to give this a shot. We're not going to learn from this gate being closed. So we grabbed all of our gear, our tent, not a backpacking tent. It was a legit like 10 plus pound tent.
Mm, yeah.
And the Tigawan Road from the gate to the trailhead is about 8 miles. And so we just said, you know what? We're going to carry all of our stuff as high as we can, and then we're just going to camp out overnight, and we'll hike the rest early in the morning to get to the trailhead, and then we'll hike from there.
Did you have backpacking packs?
No, no, we had our regular day packs
You
and
guys are
some
insane.
food. Oh my gosh, we were silly. So we stopped in Leadville ahead of time to get food and whatever else we didn't have to try and make this whole journey work. So
So you're just going to do an improvised snow camping backpacking adventure on the
basically,
fly here.
and it actually wasn't that snowy, as I recall.
Okay.
So that part wasn't quite as bad, but the worst part was each of us has our day pack with, we have cans of peas. That's going to be our food along with trail mix and other trail food. And we have this heavy tent that we have to take with us. So every half mile to a mile, we switch off. Okay, I'm going to carry the tent for a mile and then it's going to be too much. And then I'm going to hand it to Travis and he'll carry it for a mile. And then we just switched off. About halfway up, so about 4 miles up, we just said, you know what, this is too much. We're going to make camp here for tonight. Knowing that we had plenty more hiking to get to the trailhead, which we didn't do that night. So,
Yeah.
so we just set up our tent, set up our sleeping bags. So yeah, sleeping
Sleeping pads.
pads and sleeping bags and all of that stuff in addition to our day packs all pile into the tent. I don't know what time it is at this point. It's like 7, 8 at night. We're sitting in our sleeping bags, eating our can of peas. Each of us has a can, and we're about halfway through eating our peas. And mind you, Zach,
This
here's
sounds like the grapes of wrath or something like we got a can of peas on the way to California.
I don't even really like peas, and yet I'm eating them out of a
That's an
can.
inspired choice. I've never heard of
Oh,
just a can of peas for dinner. That's
and
so bachelor.
it's and so we also had a giant. Why did we do this? We had a giant can of yams from the Leadville market that we had in our packs. We never ate that. That thing sat in our pantry after we got home for like 2 years, and Rachel and I finally looked at it and threw it out. But we were carrying this like pound and a half can of yams,
Oh.
but we're eating our peas, and Travis looks over at me. He's like halfway through his can, and I'm like halfway through my can. He looks over at me and says, I don't want to eat peas anymore. Like he's a second grader. And I felt the same exact way. So we just stopped eating our peas, went to sleep, got up at like 2 in the morning, left our
Yeah.
tent and everything there, brought our day packs with us. That was great, not having to haul, a giant can of yams and a tent up with us from our camping spot up to the trailhead. But eventually we get to the trailhead. I think we could actually see the summit of Holy Cross through the trees from the trailhead. I might be mistaken there, but regardless, we get to the trailhead, and that's when we run into all the snow. So at the trailhead, we could just tell if we were to step into the snow, we'd be post-holing to our knees. And he looks at me and I looked at him and he said, yeah, this isn't going to go today. And I'm like, yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So at whatever it was, 6, 7 in the morning, we decided, okay, turn around, break camp, haul everything back down. And then we drove to Idaho Springs and went to Bojo's, had pizza and went home. So that was our failed attempt at Holy Cross, and we did get redemption a couple years later. So Travis came back out. My good friend JJ, who lives in Michigan, he's been one of my best friends for many, many years. He came out too. So we did more of a proper sort of backpacking trip where Travis and I summited Holy Cross, but we stayed in the wilderness there for a few days, and JJ kind of scoped
Nice.
out some elk hunting places. We did a lot of trout fishing, and that was a really, really fun trip. And Travis and I got to summit Holy Cross then. So we learned a lot from our first experience, and we experienced a little bit of redemption at the end.
That's an all-timer right there. I just have this vision, bro, of like you
Oh,
and Travis in a tent, like in between like snowbanks on the
yeah.
Tigawon Road with a can of freaking peas
Oh gosh.
and a spoon and just
Yep.
oh, that's sad. That's so sad.
We can laugh about it now, but
Yeah.
at the time we were like, what in the world are we doing here?
Eric, I think we just end this episode now and go home. Like that, nothing's gonna beat that for a fail.
So, Eric,
That's
how many
legendary.
lessons did you learn
Yeah,
from that whole
we need like the little
experience?
NBC thing. Ding 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 ding. The more you know.
Yeah, yeah. Shooting
Yeah,
star there.
I mean, I can
Oh,
list 4 or 5 mistakes on that one for
oh,
sure.
that's probably a minimum. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, with all due respect, that was a massive fail
No,
on your
that
part.
was a mess for sure. So yeah, don't hike in early June or even mid-June, I would say is probably the first thing. And if there's a gate locked in front of you, heed that warning and don't try and skirt around that
The
at
universe is
all.
speaking to you, and you are not listening.
We did not listen to anything there. So that's my first one, or maybe my second one.
Yeah.
So, Zach, you've got at least one. You've got two for us, right? What's your first one?
I'll say this at the outset. We're probably going to need to do another one of these because I've got one where I tried to climb Little Bear and my boot fell
That's
apart.
right. That's right.
That's a fun story, but maybe if we do a Blanca episode or something like that, we can
Yes,
talk about that one.
it's a
And then
great
I've got
call.
one where I was going up El Diente and snow came in. So that's
Mm,
another separate ball of fun. But
yeah.
my first one is actually Kit Carson.
Oh
So
yeah, I love this story.
my dad and I, who you guys heard right at about a year ago on the podcast, my dad and I, it was over the end of September in 1997. I remember it quite well as my freshman year
Oh,
of college.
wow.
And I went to Colorado College where they have block breaks. So for my block break, I wanted to go hike 14ers with my dad. So we go down. My dad said, well, they're considering making Challenger Peak a 14er because at that point it wasn't quite one yet, I think.
Okay.
And he said, let's go do that and Kit Carson. I haven't done those. And I said, okay, let's rock this, Dad. So we go out. We can talk about Challenger probably on another episode, but we take the standard route, which is up to Willow Lake. It's a long hike for anyone that's done it. It's a day.
Mm,
And since it's late September, the days are a little shorter, so we get a little bit of a later start. And we hike up to the lake. It's a beautiful golden fall day. The colors they're just magic. And at that point, really there wasn't like a standard route up Challenger. So what we wanted to do was go up Challenger and then go from Challenger over to Kit Carson.
hmm
That was the plan. There was no real route up Challenger. We just kind of walked straight up the slope to Challenger.
Is that because it wasn't an official 14er yet, you think?
That's correct. Yeah.
Interesting.
And this
Okay.
is still pre-14ers.com. This
Yeah.
is it hadn't really been talked about in guidebooks other than as an alternative or like, Jerry Roach would call it extra credit. So we go up to Challenger. We actually is hard, but we summit Challenger. We kind of just work your way up grassy slopes to that. We summit Challenger and we're good to go. I was 18 at the time. My dad was 45. He was good to go. We were ready to rock. And so we start the traverse from Challenger over to Kit Carson. And for anyone that knows, that's a pretty narrow traverse for most
Mm,
of it. It's safe, except when it has snow and ice on it. And so we don't quite get to the low point of the saddle between Challenger and Kit Carson, but it's late September.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reason I'm telling this story now is because Eric's involves snow, mine involves ice.
Yeah.
And we're kind of traversing across, and the traverse is just turning into just this beautiful, even glaze of ice the whole
Oh
way.
man.
And we start kind of walking across it and like doing the little thing where, like in Looney Tunes, like your feet start scrambling. And there's a couple moments where that happens. And like, if anyone's done that, and I'm sure our listeners have, like, that is not a good spot to make a mistake on. You've got good exposure to the west.
Mm-hmm.
And if you fall to the east, it may not be fatal, but it's going to be a really bad day. And you might tumble for a ways. And there were a couple times where we slipped and slid. And my dad, who was generally gung ho at that point, I think looked at me. He had the Travis moment and he's like, I don't think this is going to happen. And I just had in my head, I had that vision. We had kind of been looking at maps and we had read a guide which talked about the catwalk on Kit Carson. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
we can do this, Dad. And I remember both of us, he said, okay, let's go a little further. And we went like literally like 10 yards and it got like even more glazy. And I remember at that point, I was like, okay, no, we're going home. And so we very wisely turned around because if the ice was that bad on the traverse, it would have been way worse on the catwalk around Kit Carson. So
Mm-hmm.
it turned us away, but like we still got a 14er in that day. And we actually, I think, practiced proper discretion at that
Yeah.
moment. Like I don't think there's a lot that I have to learn other than that was good. What we did there was smart. We didn't push it. There's a lot of stories. There's been fatalities on Kit Carson. There's usually one or two a year. They usually happen on that part of the traverse where people
Yeah.
fall down or they try to go down an alley or route and they get cliffed out or they fall down. I'm so glad we didn't do that. And I'm equally glad we didn't try to bail from where we stopped. We retraced our tracks and went right down the way we came.
Mm.
In the end of the day, I think that was really smart. But every time I look at Kit Carson now, I've done Humboldt, I've done Mount Adams, and I've done Challenger. I've kind of done the stuff around it.
That group. Yep.
And I've done Tijeras and some other stuff. And so every time I kind of look at Kit Carson, I'm like, that's the one that got away. So,
But
um,
you alluded to it, and as you were talking, it made me think, yeah, it doesn't sound like you made any real mistakes. Quite the opposite. You made a really wise decision when you should have that, hey, this is just not going to work, and we're just going to go back and live to fight another day. So,
I think the only fault, if you will, that we may have had there was timing.
mm,
I think both of ours involve you tried to hike too early, and we tried to hike a route that was problematic if we hiked it too late.
hmm
And sometimes of the year, late September is perfectly fine for Kit Carson. It just wasn't that particular time. I think they had a little bit of freezing ice or snush the night before. And for whatever reason, it just wasn't going to go that day. And we did not have the gear. We didn't have micro spikes. We didn't have ice
yeah, yeah.
axes. We weren't ready for that. Like yours, I mean, you went back and in the summer and nailed yours on Holy Cross. And hopefully I get to do the same on Kit Carson at some point.
You're being way too nice by trying to equate our two stories there because ours involve just pure silliness. So yours just, like you said, happened to be timing, didn't work out the particular day that you tried to do it. But for us, I don't know. We were just being kind of goofy and trying to do it as early as we did. So yeah, thank
Hey,
you for being kind.
hey, sometimes that happens though. I mean, Travis is coming in from Chicago.
Mm.
Sometimes it works out where it's like, hey, we're going to give it a shot. I would not have gone past the road closed sign. I I would have stopped when peas were being discussed for dinner that evening. Like if that's the opener for hiking food, I'm like, let's somewhere a wrong turn was made. Well, so we
Uh,
have a couple snow related stories here.
mm.
Now maybe we move to a different kind of story, Eric. So what's your third tale of woe here?
Yeah, so my final tale of woe was quite an interesting one in that you got to meet Travis on this particular outing. This is back, I
The
think it was
man, the
20
myth, the legend at this
the
point.
he was no longer the myth for you once
he was
after this
he
trip.
was real.
He was the real Travis. So I think it was 2021, right? I think COVID was
Yeah.
still happening. May not have been the peak of it, but it still was very much happening in our lives. You, Travis, and I decided to go after Mount Lindsay
And it
down in
wasn't
Sauhegan.
closed yet at that point.
It was not closed. I think
It
honestly,
closed like a week after we
it
did
was
it.
like a month or so. Yeah, it was really soon after we did
Yeah.
it. It closed, and so it was just really strange timing. But we did have the opportunity. It was still open, so we said, let's do it. So I picked up Travis from the Colorado Springs airport, and we stopped in Walsenburg on the way down and I ate at the Taco Bell there.
One
Um,
of many fine dining establishments in Walsenburg,
we've,
Colorado.
we- we've mentioned Walsenburg before, and we made the trek to the Lily Lake trailhead. And Travis and I found a really nice spot to camp out right before the trailhead. I think we were there a couple hours, and then you pulled up. So, pair of Subaru Foresters just hanging out there right before Lily Lake trailhead. As I recall, you car camped, and Travis and I were in the tent. And so we got up at a reasonable time. It's not a long hike as hikes go. I think it's about 8 miles or so from the trailhead
Yeah.
to the summit and back. We start out, we're going, we get to what Roach calls a grassy ramp going from kind
Hmm.
of the initial approach up towards the saddle between Lindsay and Iron Nipple, which is the nearby 13er. Once we get to the top of that grassy ramp, Travis, I remember, said, I'm not buying this grassy ramp stuff. This is hard."
It's a grunt just to
It is a
get
grunt.
to that saddle. It's a tough. It's not technically hard. It's just physically
No.
demanding.
Yeah, just took a lot to get up there. So then we get up to the saddle and the wind starts really picking up. And so the three of us had to kind of huddle and say, okay, if we're going to do this, we're doing this. But if at any point this gets to be too much, then we're going to have to bail and turn back. And so we kind of all agreed on that. So we get up to the Northwest Gully, the standard route for Lindsay, which is kind of 2+, 3- ish in terms of that particular route. And I think that is the easiest route, if I recall.
Maybe not the safest, but the easiest.
Exactly. Yeah. Not
Yep.
maybe not the most stable, and the rock may not be as good as other routes, but it's not class 3 like some of the other routes might be. So we go up this gully and the wind is just whipping around, and I feel like the wind is literally trying to pull me off of the mountain. Now I'm
Hmm.
over dramatizing, but that's how strong the wind felt. We're just slogging up, and it's not quite like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but it just feels like it's going so slow, and it takes so much effort. And this wind is like just whipping all around us.
And there's a real chance of rock fall in there. So what we had
Oh
to do
yeah.
is I was leading, and so I
Mm-hmm.
would lead, go up, get to a side where I wouldn't kick down anything onto you and Travis, and then you guys would follow when I was clear,
Yep.
so that I was never rolling rocks onto you guys. And we
Exactly.
kind of had to do that hopscotch method for a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for most of the gully, I think. And so eventually we get to the top of the gully, which I think is at, give or take, I think at about 13.7 ish, I
Yeah,
think.
probably. Yeah, it's not far from the summit in terms of
Yeah.
altitude.
At that point, my knees are knocking, and I'm already thinking, how am I going to get down this thing? Like, even that was kind of in the back of my mind the whole
Yeah.
time we're going up. And at that point, we're at the top of the gully, and there's this little perch that you can kind of sit on and take a break. And so I took a break for about, I don't know, 15 seconds and said, yeah, I'm done. So,
So what were you so you said your knees were knocking. What were you feeling in that moment? Like what's going on in your head that says I don't want to keep going here?
yeah, I think there was a few things. So, one was the level of exposure that was there, which I think in the moment it felt like a lot of exposure. In reality, I don't think it was a ton of exposure, but there was some there in the gully.
Yeah.
But also this, seriously, the wind just, it took my head into strange places. I
Yeah,
just,
that wind on the saddle in particular, I remember when we crested that saddle, it knocked me to the ground. Like it was
yeah.
that was intense.
It was intense. And I think the last thing I thought of was, okay, this is just the gully. There's still a lot more to go, and it's not it's not 2+. Like it's going to be even harder than what we just did. So I think all that combined made me think, you know what? And the fact that I didn't realize that weeks later Lindsay would close, and so I would not have the opportunity to come back until whenever it does end up reopening. But so all of that combined for me to say, you know what? I just don't think that this is my day to do it. So you continued on through, I think, the standard route to get to the summit. Travis kind of, as you're going up the gully, he at the top, he went to kind of hiker's right and went up a little more of a precarious route, but you guys both ended up getting to the summit. There was actually a group from Ohio,
Oh, yeah, this is a whole
these,
other episode on these idiots.
these,
They're just kicking rocks down
oh
and
my
just,
gosh.
they could have killed somebody that day.
Seriously, these jockos, they're kicking them down on me. And then once they get to, I didn't get hit, but once they get down to where I was at, then they turn the corner and actually go down the gully. And I'm having to constantly yell, rock, in case anyone is
Yeah.
behind them in the gully so that they don't get smacked by a giant rock that they're kicking down. But so yeah, you guys made it. I was really glad that you guys were able to get to the top. And then you actually were able to tack on the Iron Nipple after that because you kind of came down quick enough and Travis was still at the summit to where you're like, you know what, are you okay if I tackle Iron Nipple too? And I'm like, yeah, I'll have clear line of sight to you. Not that you would have ever needed that, but there was enough proximity to where if there was ever any trouble, I could see what was happening and you could see what was happening with us. So I was like, yeah, absolutely, go ahead. And so you're able to tackle that, and then the three of us kind of converged back at the campsite, and that was our day. So yeah, the funny thing is I don't actually have regrets about that. Like I think in that moment, as hard as it was to not get to the summit, I really feel like that was the right call. So yeah, that
And
was my Lindsay experience.
that little perch you ended up sitting at, dang, the view from there was gorgeous. And
So nice.
you had a really nice view, and it turned out the wind died down. It turned out to be an absolute bluebird day. Sometimes stopping is not the worst thing you can do with your life. That was
Indeed.
great.
So you've got one more, Zach, to share with us.
Yes, so this is a 13er, and this will be a kind of similar story to your Lindsay story. This is in the
Hmm.
Sawatch. This is North Apostle.
Oh, I think you talked
So
about this
one of the
before.
three apostles. This is when I was starting to get into 13er hiking about 15 years ago. And I had done some peaks in that area, in the Winfield kind of area. And my dad had always talked about the apostles. And I thought I should go do one of the apostles. So I had Jerry Roach's 13er guidebook, Colorado 13ers. And I thought I'll do the Southwest Ridge, which is from essentially the standard trailhead for Huron,
You're
which is
Huron.
the
Yep.
the Winfield trailhead. And then instead of going towards Huron, you break off and you go towards Lake Anne. And then at Lake Anne, you break off and go up towards the Southwest Ridge of North Apostle. And I had a great start to the day. Familiar tone, start went fine. Got off to a good start. But I, at that point, was kind of new to route finding, or new to the kind of route finding that one does on 13ers. So I get up to this gully in between North Apostle and Ice Mountain, a
Hmm.
couple centennials there. It's just filled with rock and cobble and scree and talus. And if you've hiked a bunch of peaks in the Sawatch, you kind of know what I'm talking about here. But some of it's
Hmm.
rock hoppy. And so I get to this place and I just went dreadfully slow. I was being very careful, which is never a problem, except it just took me a long time to work my way up that gully. And I kept stopping and checking and stopping and checking. And it was taking me a long time. And it took me such a long time that by the time I got near the top of it, a bunch of clouds rolled in. I was getting pretty close to the home stretch of that hike where once you get to the saddle, you're kind of good. You just turn left and go up. And I thought, oh, I'm going to press on here. I'm going to do this. I worked my way tediously up this, and I could see these dark black clouds brewing. And I was like,
No.
Zach, this is bad. There's like, the little demon on my
Yeah, you
shoulders,
got.
like, but you can do it. You can do it. And I listened to that for a minute and I kept going up a little bit more. And I got, probably right about 20 feet below the saddle. And I was like, oh, I'm home free now. And right as I did that, crack, lightning
Oh,
strike, like on probably on the backside of Ice Mountain. And I was like, no, I got to get out of here.
oh
And
man.
I was like, oh, I pushed it too much. I went too far and should have seen those clouds and known. And, I'm totally exposed at that point, walking around with a couple hiking poles on, just like a couple lightning rods.
Oh man.
And so I just start making my way down. And I made my way down a lot less carefully this time than I made my way up. And, I get down quite a ways, and there's kind of a little tarn that you kind of have to go around. And I get to this tarn, and I turn around and look behind me, and the clouds have totally gone away.
No way.
It's sunshine, and, puppies are coming out. It's just like, I was like, you got to be kidding me. It looked like
Oh,
all
that's
hell was about to break loose.
terrible. Oh my gosh.
And I thought, should I do this again? I was like,
I was just
no.
going to ask if you did. Yeah.
Like, no, the mood shifted, man. I was like, no, it's over. Like, I've lost the moment. And
That's terrible. Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
like I would have bet you my life savings at that point, which at that point was not much. So, but I would have bet you my life savings that was going to be just an absolute, as they call them in the South, a frog strangler of a storm there. Like I thought it was just the heavens were gonna open up. Have you never heard about a frog strangler?
I'm not familiar with this frog
Gully,
strangler
Gully
of which you
Whomper,
speak.
a frog strangler. That's
You need to bring some southernisms more into our podcast, Zach.
it's rains so
This is
much
great.
it drowns a frog.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
So yeah, I would have bet anything. And I mean, that lightning was, like I didn't have my hair stand up, but it was close. And I was like, yikes. I've had that happen on Mount Maxwell and the Sangres and stuff too, and Mount Princeton. But I was like, I gotta get out of here. And so I booked it down and I turned around, and that it could not have been clearer, and I couldn't see a cloud anywhere. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me, man.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so you mentioned you were just below the saddle.
Hmm.
So if you had to estimate to get to the saddle and then you say you just kind of turn left and go up, how far time-wise or maybe elevation-wise were you from the summit when you decided I got to get out of here?
I was 30 minutes and 200 vertical feet.
Oh my gosh.
So like I was close. I had done the hardest
Yeah.
part. I
Yeah.
had I had done the hardest part of that hike, and like I haven't been back there, and I kick myself all the time. One doesn't just do the apostles on a lark. I should have done it, but at the time, again, talk about limited information
Mm.
and knowing what I knew then at that moment, I did the right thing. And 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, turning around then was always the right thing to do.
Yep.
It's just that one time where it cleared
Yep.
up right afterwards, where I was like, my brain is anomaly hunting. It's like, oh, you could do this. And it's like, no, that never happens otherwise. But yeah, so that turned me around. And I'm sure there's plenty of people that have plenty of stories of being turned around by storms and lightning. But
Yeah.
mine was just a rare instance where it looked bad and then it wasn't. And where I actually had like lightning strike. And it was pretty crazy. I took a picture right where I turned around, and I look at that picture. I'm like I was so close.
Oh, I
Like,
would probably burn that picture if I took it. I would just not want to remember that that's where I had to get turned around.
so here's the coda to that story. And you wanted to burn that picture. I printed it out, and I printed it out as kind of like a reminder of like you've got to hike faster and smarter so that you avoid that happening to you. And
That's
like
a
that
bulletin board material kind of
yeah,
thing, huh?
that's kind of how I used it. Was like, if I had hiked faster on the easy parts,
Mm-hmm.
then that wouldn't have happened to me. If I had
Mm.
been able to peel off miles quicker in when they're easy, then I have time when I need it. And that's kind of what it did in my head. And it also was like, I need to get better at rock hopping and talus. I need to be way better at picking roots to that stuff. So
Mm.
I kind of used it as a motivational tool,
Yeah. Yep.
kind of like Michael Jordan. And I took that personally.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, that's the one that I've got other stories of lightning that I could tell and hail and all kinds of stuff. But the lesson to be learned there is I shouldn't extrapolate that experience to other ones.
Mm,
Like in general, if you have a lightning strike, it's go home time.
go. Yep.
Yep. Don't take that one outlier where it doesn't become something and use that to justify sticking around.
Yep. It's a good call and a good lesson. I mean, the few times that I've had lightning in the vicinity, that's definitely one you do not want to mess with whatsoever because you're kind of a happenstance away from becoming a statistic as opposed to being able to come back and give it another go. So,
Yeah, and worst case scenario, I get to go back. So,
yeah. Yep.
yeah. So, Eric, we've talked about various mountains that have turned us around for a variety of reasons, some self-inflicted, some not. Um, if you had a song to assign to these, what would you assign it?
It's a great question. Normally, when we have a song, it's for a specific peak or a specific day or a specific adventure. For something like this, I think it was a little tougher to come up with a specific song to kind of encompass everything, but I think the one that I'm going to go with is by Bill Withers. The old Appalachian folk R&B guy. Love so many of his songs. He sadly passed away a few years ago, but one of the songs that he did is called Lovely Day, and he kind of recounts all these things that are just going wrong in his day, but at the end of the verses and going into the chorus, he simply says, "Just one look at you, and I know it's going to be a lovely day." And the chorus just kind of soars from there over this repetition of lovely day. And in the song, he's talking about a person, I'm guessing a love interest, but
Hmm.
I think it applies to the mountains too. Even if bad things are happening, if we're making mistakes or weather's coming in, stuff that's beyond our control, even so, it can still be a lovely day. And as we've alluded to, we can learn from the experience. But again, we're in the mountains, and the mountain's always going to be there, right? They're going to long outlive us. So even if we don't get to the summit that day, there may be another chance,
Yeah,
another time. Enjoy the day that you did get to have,
exactly.
whether you got there or not. So I'm going to go with Lovely Day by Bill Withers.
Does Lovely Day talk about eating canned peas? It's not a lovely day.
Just one can of peas. Yeah. So what's your song, Zach, for the
Before
one
we
that
get to
turned you
that, did
back?
you even heat up the peas or did you just eat them straight out of the can cold?
Heat up? Are you kidding me? I didn't even own a jet boil at that point. There's
Oh
nothing to
God.
ambient room
Cold,
temperature.
cold tin peas. Paging, paging Charles Dickens here. That just sounds.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Uh, all right. Well, yeah. So my song is Tom Petty's "Learning to Fly." It's just
Oh,
a
love that song.
pardon me for being obvious, but learning to fly, but I ain't got wings. Coming down is the hardest thing.
Mm,
Both of my experiences were at junctures where I was learning about
mm,
some things. The challenger to Kit Carson was learning to do harder 14ers and learning my own limits and learning the limits the mountain is going to impose on me. And that's when I was
yeah.
18. And then North Apostle was just about, I was learning how to hike 13ers at that point
Mm,
without a lot of help from, 14ers have trails, or at least a lot of them do. And so I was learning my own limitations there and what I needed to get better at. And so even though it sounds quite trite, I was learning to fly and I didn't have wings yet at that point. And so for both of them, I really thought about that Tom Petty song.
that's a great one. And to hear you say that kind of stings a little bit. Coming down really is the hardest thing
Mm,
when you didn't make it all the way to where you wanted to get to. So
yeah.
that hits a little too close to home, Zach. So thanks for that. But no, that's a great pick. That's a fantastic song. And yeah, what a great way to summarize it.
Do you have any overall takes that you take away from your collective experiences of being turned away, Eric?
Oh, I think one thing, it didn't really even occur to me until you just mentioned it really wisely. it's helpful to be able to know your limitations and to
Hmm.
know when to turn back and to be comfortable with that. Comfortable knowing, hey, I'm not going to make it this time, and that's okay. I'm okay just enjoying the adventure that I did have, and maybe I'll work up to trying this again another time. I think there's a whole lot of wisdom there, and I'm sure there's plenty of hikers that have a really hard time getting to that point where they can
Oh,
be
you
okay
get
with turning
summit
around.
fever pretty bad.
Hmm. Yep.
And getting to that place of acceptance where you're like, it may not happen. This one may not go on my list, or
Yep.
whatever it is that you're doing it for. Need to have more of an orientation towards, I'm just going to enjoy what I get, however I get it. The goal is to go to the top, but a lot of the time that's not going to happen.
Yep. So before I ask you, Zach, for a parting thought, I know I've been turned around a handful of times on the mountain. You've summited far more than I have. You've been turned around far more than I have as well. Do you think that getting to that place of being comfortable turning around, has that gotten easier for you over time? Has it gotten harder? Is it just something that you've innately had and you've just been able to use the entire time that you've been hiking 13ers and 14ers?
That's a great question. I've gotten to a place where I'm more process oriented in terms of my hiking. I enjoy just getting out now,
Hmm.
and I'm able to balance the desire for a peak alongside the recognition that it may not happen. And I'm able to be both goal oriented and journey oriented at the same time, if that makes sense. Like, I
Yeah.
want to go to the top, but if I don't, it's okay. And I'm going to push to get to the top. Like, you're always
Hmm.
towing that line of like, I'm going to go as hard as I can, as long as I can, until my body or nature tells me otherwise. Then when that happens, I'm going to accept it.
Hmm.
And I've grown to that place. That's, I guess, if I have any wisdom or maturity at age 46, it's probably that. I'm okay with that now. And yeah, we could do probably another 6 episodes of my stories of being turned around, because when we sat down to research this, I've got a dozen. Not just like I didn't feel good that morning, or like got up, got a ways, got within half a mile of the peak and then had to turn around kind of stuff. I've got a fair number of those. But in every one of them, I think my overall wisdom, or my take home from all this, is you've got to play the probabilities. With my apostles story, it didn't turn out that one time that that was the right call, but 90% of the time, that's the right call. And you've got to just kind of know what those are and be willing to live with some not summits in
Yeah.
there. So, yeah. Well, anything else before we send our listeners on their merry way, Eric?
Honestly, this was a lot of fun to kind of recount, even if some harsh memories of lightning and ice that graced some of these stories and peas. But
Dude, I had not heard the details of that story, and
no,
I've
we
known
hadn't
you for
talked
a
about
long
that.
time, and I'm gonna rib you relentlessly about that. That's uh I just there's just so many, a can of yams. Like, what are you doing?
And I cannot tell you if I went to the store, I would look for the how big this can of yams was.
Oh,
This
I know
is
which
the
size you're talking.
Oh my gosh.
It's like a 28 or 32 ounce
Oh yeah,
can.
it's like 2 pounds worth of yams, and it's just in our pack, just taking up space and taking up
Uh,
weight.
oh
So
wow. Dang. That's a beauty.
that's
That is good stuff, Eric.
uh
Well, if anyone wants to relay their stories of being turned around to us, Eric, how can they reach us?
oh, we'd love to hear those stories and more at our email address, which is greensandbluespodcast@gmail.com. You can reach out to us on our Facebook group. You can watch us some videos on our YouTube channel. You can get a hold of Zach specifically at X at NM Hiker Person or at Zach Simpson on Blue Sky, which I still have not even, I have no idea what that app is. I have no familiarity with Blue Sky.
It's
You are an
basically a
early
Twitter
adopter.
knockoff. Just with more moderation of bots and terrible content.
No, there you go.
As always, everyone, thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to hearing your stories, and we'll catch you next time.